Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck podcast. As always, I am your host, Jacob Strozyk, and joined by my co-hosts.
Jacob Billington, as always.
And today, we're going to do our personal list for the top 10 players at each position, and based on how we would be building our teams. Before we go into that, as always, I'm going to pose a question to my co-hosts. For this one, if you were going to build your team for a dynasty or a keeper league, what position do you prioritize choosing before others, and which one would you kind of wait till later rounds to pick?
Yeah, I definitely go with my goaltender first. I just like to have one that, we're going to talk about our top goaltenders, of course, but like Ilya Sorokin, Igor Shesterkin, and like on the younger side, obviously you want to have them for a while, but you want the elite ones that you're always going to be able to rely on them.
See, I kind of have a different take for that. Me personally, if I were to build, I'd build centers down because if I have my center depth first, I can always build pairings based off of those centers, and you can usually find more points. Goaltending for me, while yes, having one of those elite ones is great for any league, I just feel like you can find steals, whether it be from rookies or hot goalies, that you can cycle that through. But that's just kind of how I play it on a regular basis.
That's fair. But see, the way I look at it is you would have got, if you started a keeper league 5 years ago and you drafted Vasilevsky, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm not disagreeing that it's a good idea, but it kind of just it's just another further reflection of people build their teams in different ways, and I think that's kind of a good setup for when we go into these lists that people are going to notice. You build yours one way, I build mine. It's maybe a slightly different way, but let's jump into it. Let's start with the right wing category. Who do you have at your number one spot?
Number one, I think, is pretty easy right now. It's going to be Matthew Tkachuk coming off of a monster season and even better in the playoffs. I think he's going to keep building on that. And I don't want to call him a bit of a late bloomer, but he's still just taking that next step every single season. And while he's getting to that point that he's expected to kind of plateau into his prime, I do think that maybe there's even another step he can get the 110, 120 points just because he's that good.
Yeah, I also have Kachuk at one, and you'll see him listed at left and right wing, but we're going to put him at right wing for our discussion's sake today. I agree with you on every point you made, and I also saw something that he's fully recovered from his injury in the playoffs, so he's going to be ready to go to start the season. So I wouldn't have any qualms taking him in a top end spot, especially if you're picking by position. So no disagreements on Matt Kachuk whatsoever. Let's go to number two. I personally have David Pastrnak there. I think pure goal scoring along with pure point scoring is just something you can't replace. And Pastrnak just does it year after year after year after year. He's one of the league's best goal scorers. So I would pick him with definitely at least one of my top five, top six picks.
Yeah, I agree. I have him in my second spot as well. And like this year, all the offense is going to run straight through him. He's going to be the number one guy on the power play. He's going to be at 5-on-5. He's fantastic as well. He's not just a power play merchant. And I don't think he's going to take a step back at all without who was the center? Bergeron, sorry.
Bergeron, yeah.
I couldn't think if it was Bergeron or Krejci last year. But either way, he's not going to take a step back, even though he's going to be playing with either Charlie Coyle or Pavel Zacha. He's still going to be more than fine, whether it's DeBrusque on his wing. Like, there's so many question marks with how that roster is going to shape out, but
Yeah.
it doesn't even matter when looking at Pastrnak. He's going to succeed either way.
Do you think he hits 60 goals again this year, or do you think he drops back into the 50s?
I'm gonna hit the just barely the under on that. I think he gets 57, 58, right around there.
I was going to say about 55, I think is a good number for him, but I still think it's 100 point. If he's not at 100, he's sitting at like 99. Like
Yeah.
he wouldn't be far off. So I love Pastrnak. What would be your number three right winger?
I'm gonna take Mikko Rantanen for all of
Okay.
the same reasons that we just talked about with Pastrnak. All the offense runs through multiple people on that Colorado Avalanche team. Obviously, you have McKinnon and Makar there as well, but he's the goal scorer. He's the one that's going to score the majority of the goals. He's going to finish the season with the most goals on that team, and he does the assists as well. Like, he's not just a goal scorer, and that's what makes him really valuable. He can throw some hits as well. He's pretty balanced, and I really like everything about him. And he's playing with some fantastic players that'll rack up the points with him.
Yeah, I also have Rantanen at my third spot. And you're right. He's like a left-handed Pasternak, so that's honestly a really great comparison. And another good thing about him is if there's any injuries that tend to happen up front, he's still carrying that load. He doesn't slow down just because McKinnon might be out or because Landeskog has been out and will continue to be out for an extended period of time. So I love Rantanen as a fantasy player in general. I'm still frustrated I haven't been able to get him in any of my leagues. Maybe this year, we'll see. But I really love the way that he just continues and consistently scores points in fantasy.
Yeah.
All right, move along.
Well,
Let's do number 4. Or if you had another point, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say, like, even if you like you mentioned with McKinnon going down, McKinnon's usually right around the 70 game mark.
Mhm.
But Rantanen led the way with an AHL team for half of the season last year, and he played center for a good bit. So
Yeah. All right. Give me a number 4.
Mitch Marner. I do think that he's going to crack 100 points this year. He is going to be playing with Austin Matthews again, and he's going to have Tyler Bertuzzi on his wing, I expect. And it's not just points with him. All the little things are also going to kind of add up, like plus minus. He's not going to score a ton of goals. He might hit 30. He did start shooting a lot more last year, which was really nice to see if you were if you own him in fantasy. But the assists, like, he's going to put up 70, 75 assists a season. And obviously there's not too many defensive metrics that really help you out in fantasy, but like Selke nominee year in, year out. Yeah, that's where I'm at with him.
Yeah, Martin's pretty straightforward. For me, I had a slightly different pick. I went with Kucherov at my number 4 because to me, a healthy Kucherov is better than just about anybody else at the next portions of my list because a healthy Kucherov playing a full season or even like a 75 game season, he's still 100+ point player, and he's just going to keep racking up those kinds of points. The injury history might sway some people off of him, but for me, it's justifiable to continue to have him in top picks, especially in your fantasy draft, because he just puts up so many points in relation to his teammates. So I would personally take him over Marner, who is who I have at 5. So if you want to throw something in on Kucherov, go ahead.
Yeah, so Kucherov is who I have at 5, and for all the same reasons you mentioned, he's fantastic. He's going to get so many points. The only reason that I have him behind Marner is that injury history. For me, they're pretty well neck and neck for that 5th spot, or 4th spot, I guess. But it's just the injury history that made me pick Marner over him. That's it.
Yeah, I don't have any qualms with Marner as a player, but an assist machine is lesser on my list than a goal scoring, point scoring machine type player. So that's my differentiation between my 4 and 5. Number 6, who do you have there?
William Nylander. So I think
Okay.
he's going to have a really big year this year. Obviously, 40 goals, 80 points. That's pretty good on its own. He's still without a contract for next season. And I think he's going to be playing for every dollar that he can earn. And I do think that he's going to be a huge part of any success that the Toronto Maple Leafs see this season. He's been one of the best playoff performers for them. And while that doesn't usually impact any fantasy leagues, he's coming off of a pretty good postseason. And I think he's going to just continue that into the regular season, probably score at least 40 goals again, maybe hit the 90 points this year. I think he's going to have a really good year.
Okay. I mean, I have Nylander a little bit further down on my list. But at number 6 for me, I have Alex Tuch. I really, really believe he's going to take another step forward this year as Buffalo continues to, kind of drive their offense up and up and up. And he has some of the most ridiculous chemistry with Tage Thompson. So if Thompson's scoring, Tuck's uh, usually a part of that play, and I really think he's going to eclipse the 85-point mark, possibly even into that 90-point mark, if he stays healthy all year round. He had a bit of an injury bug bite him last year, but still, that wouldn't stray me away from him. He does everything from blocking shots to scoring points to getting assists, and he even throws enough hits to make it worth his while, and that coverage puts him at a higher value than Nylander and my next player.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I do have Tuck, like you said with Nylander, just a little bit further down.
And we'll keep on trucking along. Who is your number 7?
Timo Meyer. So we talked a little bit
Okay.
about which side he plays on, which list we're going to put him on. But
Yeah.
looking at my right wing list, I'm comfortable putting him at number 7. There's such a fantastic top 6 group in New Jersey right now that Timo Meyer is going to be like, he's just surrounded by talent that's going to help him out. But on his own, even like, he's still a goal scorer, point machine. He does all the right things, and similar to Nylander, like 40 goals, 80 points, 90 points, certainly possible this year. And yeah, like, he's getting an opportunity to play with the best players that he's played with in his career. Um, that might be a bit of a controversial take, but I don't. I think that he's in the best position of his career, and he's going to put up a huge season this year.
Yeah, I don't think it's really a hot take to say that he's playing with better players at this point in his career, because he is. And they're much more young, skilled players than what he was doing in San Jose, where he was the young, skilled player kind of carrying that offense. So it's a little bit different, and he might be reaping those rewards. I have Meyer a little bit lower on my list. At 7, I have Andrei Svechnikov. If, again, it's an if he is healthy, I really, really love his goal scoring talent, especially on Carolina, who is just a really good team. I think Svechnikov has that potential to just continue to score 40 goals just throughout the next handful of years. I do think there's potential for him being a 50-goal scorer somewhere in there. I'm not sure if he's a consistent 50-goal scorer, but I think he's a consistent 40-goal scorer that will just drive the right side in any league.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Svechnikov as well, and he's a power forward. A lot of people might not kind of realize that. He's a very high skilled power forward, but I'm not as sold on him as some. I have him. I don't have him in my top 10 for right wingers, but I completely understand your point. I don't even have any reason to disagree. There's just some players that I think are a little bit better, and him coming off of a pretty brutal injury from last year, I don't know how hot he's going to be out of the gate. That it does play a little bit of a factor for me.
Understood. Give me your number 8 then.
Yeah, so that's where I have Alex Tuck.
Okay.
Huge fan of him. I had him last year, and he really surprised me last year. I do think that he definitely can take that next step, and especially if he can stay healthy, like you mentioned, that's pretty much the biggest factor for him. Even if I was confident he was going to stay healthy all year, this is still right around where I would have him. The injury history doesn't bother me at all. So yeah, all the same things you said about him already.
Yeah, I have Willie Nylander at 8 for all the similar reasons that you mentioned before, but I really focus in on his goal scoring as the primary factor for having him there. I think he gets overshadowed in Toronto, which is why I have him a little bit lower, because he has to compete with Matthews, Marner, Tavares for that kind of scoring room on the ice. And I think that might drop him down a little bit in some leagues, and that's where he kind of drops down in mine. Throw me your number 9.
This is where I have Alex DeBrincat.
Okay.
I really like DeBrincat. Obviously, following Ottawa last year, it was pretty frustrating. He could have had 35 goals if the net was like 2 inches bigger. But he's going to Detroit, and he's going to be playing with Dylan Larkin and Lucas Raymond. That's going to be a really, really good line. Last year, he was playing with Shane Pinto as his center. Pinto didn't do very well in that position. So he's definitely taking an upgrade on his line mates. And I'm really excited to see how well he can do. Obviously, there's a lot of drama going around with him and the departure from Ottawa right now. But if he can put all that behind him and just focus on the hockey, he's going to have no problem hitting 40 goals again.
Do you think he can hit that 40 again? That's what I was going to ask you, kind of as a follow-up. I'm in the boat where I kind of disagree that he can hit that 40 mark again. I think he can jump up into the 30s again. I think he's going to be a driving force for the Detroit offense, but I don't have him in my top 10 personally because I don't think there's enough there. And I don't think there was enough out of him when he was in Ottawa to show me that he can do it by himself if something happens otherwise.
Yeah, that's fair. And the only other thing I want to add is that his playmaking ability, I didn't realize until I watched him so close in Ottawa last year, but pretty underrated playmaking abilities. Like he can make some really good passes and plays. So having Lucas Raymond, who can also score maybe 30 goals this year, I think it'll be a really good fit for him.
Yeah, I'm not denying the fit. I still think
Yeah.
he can have the success if everything around him is going well. It's my problem is just with his solo ability to create compared to some of these other players. My number 9, I have Timo Meyer there. I think he's going to drop off a little bit in his goal scoring. I think some of that is going to be taken by his line mates, but I still think he's going to be that 30 plus goal scoring, up his point totals to probably somewhere around 75 points. But he really adds fantasy value in his physicality. He does throw a good amount of hits. And that's somebody that I love to have on my right side is going to contribute physical on top of their scoring. So I love Meyer at 9. And I don't really have much else beyond that to throw in there. So let's do number 10.
Yeah, so my number 10, I don't know if this is going to be a controversial take headed into the season or not, but I have Cole Caulfield. I know there's a lot of people that were kind of in my mind for this last spot. But if you look at Caulfield's year last year, he was on pace for, 43 goals before his injury. As long as he can stay healthy this year, I think that 40 goals is no problem for him. He doesn't provide a whole bunch more other than his goals and maybe his assists if him and Nick Suzuki continue on the way they have been. But I do think that his goal scoring, if you can get him kind of later in the draft, I think that that's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I debated on putting Caulfield on my list. He didn't crack my top 10. But you're right. He is pure goal scoring, pure point scoring. He's too small to really add any physical nature. He's not going to be out there diving to block shots. He's not going to be out there doing PK stuff. He's power play points, even strength points, and goals. End of story. Yeah. Do I think he can hit 40? Yeah, absolutely. I think there's even a chance he throws up 50 goals in the next 2 years. I'm not sure if he'll do it this year, but once, Montreal is on the up and up, I think he's going to be a primary source of scoring and he can hit that 50 goal mark, even if he only has like 30 assists on the other side.
Yeah, I think one big factor with Caulfield for this upcoming season is Juraj Slafkovsky. If he ends up on that first line with Suzuki and Caulfield and puts up 45, 50 points, maybe even more, and just has a huge sophomore season, then I think that Caulfield's in a way better position than he was last year.
I think he'll give more room to Caulfield being the bigger kind of power forward that he is. So I don't have any qualms with that either. Yeah. Number 10 for me, you'll recognize Vladimir Tarasenko. I have always loved Tarasenko in every year of fantasy besides when he has long-term injuries. But when he's on the ice, he's usually scoring points for me. And he's always been consistent at it, barring, I think, 1 year a couple of years ago. But every other year, he's been just a very good, consistent scoring player. And I always end up getting him in some capacity, whether it's temporarily or in a big trade move when he's on a hot streak type thing. So I love him as a player and I love him as a fantasy asset. That's just how it is for me.
It's so hard to predict what kind of year he's going to have because there's a lot of goals scoring to go around in Ottawa's top 6. And he's coming off of not a very good year last year. He only scored 18 goals. But the year before that, he was at 34 goals and 83 points. So, like, what version of Tarasenko are you going to get in Ottawa this year? I don't know. A little bit too risky for me to take in my top 10 for right wingers, but I hope you're right.
I hope I'm not. For the sake of the Atlantic Division, I sure hope I'm not. For a fantasy owner, I hope I am. All right, let's dip in the next category. Let's do left wingers.
I know that we have
Oh,
the same first pick. We talked about this last week, but Brady Kachuk first overall. Well, for the left wings, um,
yeah,
he he's going to score 80 points ish, maybe even more. He's got the physicality, he's got the shots, he's got the hits, he's got every single thing that you want from a fantasy player. He's the most well-rounded player that will get you the most points every single season.
yeah. If you want to hear the deep dive on what we did into Brady or even Matthew, if you prefer him, but for Brady specifically, go ahead and listen to our podcasts about left wingers because there was a nice long rant about that. I don't really need to dive much into it because you said it. That's exactly why he's at number one,
Yeah.
all around point scorer. End of story, nice and simple. Number two,
I've got Jason Robertson second. I think,
sweet.
yeah, I think that's a pretty easy pick. I 100% understand people wanting to take him first. He's going to get the most, probably score the most points out of any of the left wingers. He's going to score the most goals, probably. He's probably going to hit 50 this year. And just for the offense alone, he's worth taking second, even first, if that's the way you prefer.
Yeah, I'm confident he'll hit 50. He's going to be a 90 plus, pushing 100 point scoring player on that really, really talented Dallas team. If you're for at any reason doubting if Robertson can do it again, you're kidding yourself. Pick him before somebody else does and have your top line scoring winger.
Yeah. Well, if you remember in our draft last year, because it looked like he was going to hold out for a bit. Devin got
Mm-hmm.
him in like the third or fourth round, I think. It was
Yeah, I
ridiculous.
picked him right before I did. I'll never forget it. It was like one or two picks before I did. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, damn it. It was so close. That's all right. That's how drafts go sometimes. Somebody else has the same idea as you just before you do. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. Pick them before somebody else thinks doing it. All right, let's roll the number three.
I've got Kirill Kaprizov. I think that I know I talked about him being a little bit overrated, but he's still a fantastic player. He's probably still going to hit the 90, 95 points, 35 to 40 goals. That's kind of his floor right now. I don't, the only reason he's not higher and contending with Brady Kachuk and Jason Robertson is because last year and the expectation this year is that his center is Ryan Hartman, who you're not getting much offense from him. It seems to work. They have good chemistry. Um, but yeah, Kaprizov is my third pick.
I also Kaprizov at three, and I don't think his center being Hartman is really that much difference because Hartman's not the one driving the play. Hartman's the one just winning the draw, getting it to Kaprizov and letting him drive the play. Everything feeds off of Kaprizov, not the other way around. And that's why I feel like it justifies him being in that third spot because he is the superstar. He is the play driver. Um, Nothing to really add beyond that. Let's do number four.
I don't know how I feel about this pick. I put him here
Okay.
and then I put him lower and then I put him back up. Alexander Ovechkin. I
Okay.
just his hits, his shots, and his goals. How much is he going to get of all of those? Obviously, he's going to be 37, 38 when the season
Yep.
starts. It's like he hasn't really slowed down yet. I still think he's good for 45 goals this season. He's going to get a ton of hits. He just plays that physical game, ton of shots. He's going to be top five, top 10 in the league every single year until he retires.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's just a matter of is he going to slow down?
Yeah, I kind of had that same dilemma when I was kind of looking at the players. I was like, you can't really justify putting him much lower than this because of how rounded the game is. The
Yeah.
only reason you could is the age. Will he do it? He hasn't shown that he will. Not yet, at least. And if he's still even, you know, half of what he normally was being Alex Ovechkin, he's still that 35, 40 goal scorer. And you're not going to hate anything you get out of him because he's still going to throw hits. He's still in pretty good shape. So I love Ovechkin as a fantasy owner. Don't don't skip him in your leagues just because he's older. because he's going to provide way more value than you assume he will.
Yeah. So do you have him fourth too?
Yeah, I have him at 4. That's kind of why I was like, does he belong lower? Does he not? But I can't justify putting him lower just because of his usual impact and the pattern that he has.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump to number 5.
So I put Ryan Nugent-Hopkins here.
Okay.
It's some people might still have him in under the center category, but I have him in left wing. You do as well. Coming off a 100-point season, is he going to replicate that? I'm not sure, but still 85 to 95 points is perfectly realistic. 30 goals, 35 goals maybe. I think just a pretty well-rounded game. He's not going to get you. I think we talked. He had a lot more shots than I thought he did. He's not super physical, but he's still going to get you some hits. Yeah, pretty well-rounded, but it's the point totals that are kind of going to bump him up. Bump him up a little bit.
Yeah, for him, it's points and power play points. I have Nugent Hopkins at 5, so on the next pick. But I'll jump on him now because you're right. He is listed at center on a lot of things, but he didn't really play a lot of center last year, not compared to what he normally did. He was really more winger, and especially on that power play where he got an obscene amount of power play points, and that's kind of where you're going to be looking to get your value out of Nugent Hopkins again this year. Is really that power play, the power play total points, whether it's goals or assists. He gets them both. So will he get the 100 points again? Yeah, it's possible. It all depends on if Edmonton decides to have an illegal power play again. That's really completely up to them.
Yeah.
But he'll still provide value either way. So I had him below it. My number 5, personally, I had Kyle Connor there just because of the consistency in scoring. Connor every single year is that, high 30s to 40 goal scorer, pretty much point per game, little over it type guy. And in fantasy, consistency for me is key. And I love, love, love having him. And I will try to do everything in my power pretty much every single year to make sure he's on my team because I just love what he provides me as a fantasy owner.
Fair enough. And I do love the consistency as well. I'm a little bit more weary. I do have him on my list a bit lower, but I'm not as high on Winnipeg picks this year, just because I think they're transitioning into more of a defensive team. Obviously, the acquisition of Iafallo, Velarde, and Kupari, that's 3 pretty solid defensive assets. And then they got rid of Blake Wheeler and Pierre-Luc Dubois. They're way better defensively now. Rick Bowness is a defensive coach. I don't know how much offense is going to run through Kyle Connor this year. I still think he's going to get 40 goals, 40 assists. But last year he had 47 and 47. So I don't think he's going to be quite up there pushing 50 this year, but he's still a great pick.
Yeah, that's just why I like him, is the consistency. Who do you have at your number 6? Because I already said Nugent Hopkins was mine.
Yeah. So I have, who do I have? I have Artemi Panarin.
Okay.
I feel like I'm not as high on Panarin as a lot of people are, but obviously you haven't mentioned him yet, so neither are you. But I do think that he's going to go higher in the draft than where I kind of predict. He's a great point producer, on a great forward group in New York with the Rangers. He's got some great line mates, and there's not even a ton to say about him really. He's steady. He's going to get you 90 points. He might push higher than that on a good year, but he's good for like 90 points, and that's about it. He's not super physical. He gets a good amount of shots. But yeah, he'll get the power play points too.
Yeah, I've always liked Panarin again for that consistency on what he does as a point scorer. He's primarily a playmaker, so he's assists first before he gets goals.
Yeah.
But it's not like he slacks on the goals. He's normally sitting around 30 goals. So you don't really have to worry about that. And being a top line type player, he's always going to be getting power play points. He's not a physical type guy. He's not a defensive type guy. So I have him lower on my list. You have him at 6. I have Panarin down at 9.
Right.
So I think the reason for it is similar, but I just value a couple more players over him, probably comparable to you. So let's jump to number 7 then.
Yeah, so here, and for pretty much all the same reasons I talked about Timo Meier, I have Jesper Bratt. He's going to be a point producing machine. He's going to score goals. He's not as physical as Meyer is, but he's got the shots. He's still got another step to take with his points. And yeah, he's just on a better line this year, and I think he's going to do really well.
Okay. I liked Brat last year, and I really think he took that right step to being a top end, winger, and he really ran with it. So I have Brat down in my 10 spot. So you've spoiled my 9 and 10, and that's fine. But no, I don't have any disagreement with you. Being the type of player he is and the players that he has, New Jersey, in general, if you have somebody in the top 6 on New Jersey, you're going to be getting a whole lot of points. That's just the long and short of that. Number 7 for me, I have Jake Gensel. I think he's still criminally underrated when it comes to fantasy, and a lot of people just don't pay attention to him because of the big names that are in Pittsburgh. He's going to get overshadowed, and people just aren't, really going to pay attention to him. But he doesn't need them. He's shown time and time again that he can score goals and points if Crosby and Malkin aren't around. Just having them around is a bonus because they're obviously going to make him even better than he already is. I love Gensel as a fantasy asset. I would say people sleep on him more than they do, and I really don't think they should.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I do think that he is fantastic. He's my number 11, so I don't have him in my top 10, but I did have him in there. And then right before we started recording, I switched him out for somebody else. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, all right, then let's see where you go with your number 8.
So this is where I have Kyle Connor, and we both already talked about him, so I'll just kind of let you go on to your number 8.
Sure. I had Evander Kane, and some people might disagree with this, but I have a very particular reason. Kane, every single time for fantasy, surprises me in how much he provides for physicality on top of his point scoring. So people will stray away from him for a number of reasons, whether they just don't like him as a person or they disagree with any of his off-ice antics or something like that. But when it comes to fantasy, I like to take all of that out of the equation and just look at what he produces. So I think he's well worth one of your top 10 left wing picks.
Yep.
And every single year he does it for me. If he's not being suspended for something that he did, with a dirty hit or something, because let's be honest, it happens sometimes. And he has a history of it. If he's not suspended, he's producing. And that's really the long and short of it for him. And I don't really have anything negative beyond the potential suspensions that he might get.
Yeah, I do like how well-rounded his game is. I don't have him on my top 10. But I don't have anything to disagree about you with. With these from 7 to 10 and then even to 13, they're just so close, and it's all preference and based on kind of what you see and how you project for their season to go. But for my number 9, we're on number 9, right?
Yeah, I did my 9 and 10. My 9 and 10 are Panarin and Brat, so I'll let you roll. Who's your 9?
So number 9, I have Clayton Keller. I think he's going to have a huge year. He's got way better line mates just all up and down the lineup. Going to have a better power play. And if he can click with Logan Cooley, if those two end up working well together, then he's in a really great spot. He put up 85 points last year on Arizona, and there was nobody scoring points on Arizona last year. So for this upcoming season, there's way more talent on that roster just from top to bottom. And I think that he's in a much better position. I think he can crack 90 points.
Yeah, Keller's a menace. If you want a criminally underrated winger that's just going to keep scoring points out of sheer spite, pick up Keller. That's my take on him.
Yeah, he's great. And I've mentioned it a few times. I'm a huge fan of what Arizona's done this offseason. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people next year, and so will Keller.
We talked about him a bunch during the course of last season. Not you and me, but me and the old host. But we definitely talked about Keller a lot. So anybody who's been watching for a while knows how much we like Keller on the show. Throw me your 10.
Moving on to my number 10, I have Zach Hyman. Now, some people have him left, some people have him right, but I think we agreed that he was a left winger. We talked about him with our left wingers.
Hmm.
He's playing with McDavid. Like, that's enough said. He has the physicality, kind of all the same reasons that you mentioned about Evander Kane. He
Hmm.
gets the physicality. He probably gets a decent amount of blocks too. I haven't checked, but I feel like he would get
He was
like
shooting a lot last year was the stat that stood out to us.
yeah, his shots were insane last year. Um, Goals, assists, everything. So yeah, him and Evander Kane kind of interchangeable, all based on your preference.
Yeah, Hyman was my number 11. I just couldn't find a reason to dip him up above some of my other picks. So
Yeah.
I don't have any issues grabbing Hyman with any top end pick. I love him as a player and I love him as a point scorer in any fantasy league. So absolutely. All right. Before we dip into the next one, real quick, here is a message from the hockey writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
Okay, everybody, we are back. Let's jump to the next category, defensemen.
Yeah,
This
so
is going to
number
go
one,
fairly simple.
yeah, number one, super easy, Cale Makar. Ton of points, ton of just everything. Like everything that Cale Makar does is it helps you out in fantasy. He's just so well rounded, and there's no gripes against his game whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree. Makar is probably the worst defenseman. No, I'm kidding. No, like, if you are anywhere, if you have Makar dropping anywhere out of your top 5 for your draft,
Yep.
start screaming for joy because he scores goals, which is awesome as a defenseman. He gets a good amount of assists, and he still gets a decent amount of blocks and hits, which he should as a defenseman. He's an all-around fantasy asset, not just a defenseman. So
Right.
Makar 1, period. Who's your 2?
So number two, I got Adam Fox
Okay.
for the exact same reasons as Makar. Like, there's not even anything different to say about him.
No.
He's got arguably just as much offense on that team for his points and whatnot. But yeah, like he's just as well rounded as Makar.
Yeah, he does what Makar does, just slower. That's
Yep.
it.
Yep.
That really is the difference, and just not 100% up to the same exact level. It's like the smallest half step back. Yeah, I have Fox 2. Who do you have at 3?
So I have Rasmus Dahlin at 3. I'm sure you'll be happy to
Okay.
hear that.
Yeah, I agree.
And again, like he's a great two-way defenseman. He's got that offense that obviously Fox and Makar have, but he might be able to take a huge next step this season with more offense coming through the Buffalo system. And I'm willing to bet that he's going to have a monster year, and I think he's going to win the Norris this year.
I like that take, and I'm inclined to hopefully agree with you on that. I also have Darlene at my 3,
Okay.
but the reason why I kind of have him below the other 2 is not because he's any worse than them, just because his points tend to lead towards the assists as opposed to the goals, where the other 2 definitely score more goals. He gets about the same amount of hits and blocks as the other 2 do. He's similar in that regard, but because he's more of an assist defenseman as opposed to a goal defenseman, I think he drops below those 2. But no disagreement. Love the take about the Norris.
As long as
Before
they
I
miss the
start girling over that, no, that's not allowed. We're not going to have that. We'll just viciously attack each other on Twitter over it, probably. All right, let's do number 4.
Number 4 is for me is Miro Heiskanen. We already
Okay.
talked about how dangerous that Dallas unit is. There's so many players on that team that can do some great things. But he's also taking that next step offensively too. And he's kind of a mix between the Dahlin and the Makar and Fox for the goals. He's kind of right there in the middle. Same amount of points. He also gets the hits and blocks and whatnot. I feel repetitive with these top 4. It's about to change up for me at least. But yeah, for all the same reasons, just again, that little half step below.
Yeah, I have Heiskanen a little bit lower, and you probably won't like where it is, but I have him down at 7,
Ooh.
just for I think some of these other picks that I have above him, I would personally grab first for the sake of rounding out my team based off of what I would build at this point. Heiskanen for me is still a top end D, but I wouldn't personally take him until maybe my third roundish, just because I would have at that point picked my top center and my top winger, and then maybe even another winger on top of that to kind of build up. And he would be a round out option as opposed to a, you know, primary scoring option for me. That's the only reason I would have him lower. But I don't disagree with the assessment that you made. My number four, personally, if I'm going for, producing top end defenseman, I'd go with Yossi, because he still does the point scoring on top of the physicality and the blocks. He gets that peripheral coverage that I really, really like for my top point producing defenseman. It's all the same as the other three for Yossi. It's the same thing, just again, slightly slower.
Okay, so you're actually going to be probably really upset, but this is my hottest
Okay.
take of the day. I have Yossi down at 9.
Okay.
Yeah, I just and
Justify that, please.
I'll talk about it a little more. There's just the only good thing, well, UC Saros, but the only good thing about the skaters in Nashville this season is the defense. There are 6 pretty good defensemen. Like, I really like their defense core. They don't have any forwards that are going to produce for them this year. They kind of finished last year with most of an AHL team, and they just kind of went with it for this year too. They added a couple nice pieces like Ryan O'Reilly and whatnot. But I don't know. I just think he's going to take that step back this year. He's fantastic. I love him. But the offense is going to take a step back. The defense isn't going to be as relied on him. Obviously, Nashville always has great defensive groups, but I do think that it's going to be more balanced this year. So that's just my hot take of the day.
That's fine. I asked you to justify it, and you did. So I'm going to take that, and we'll run to number 5. Who do you got there?
I got Quinn Hughes. I think he's going to have a huge year this year. Obviously, he just got the captaincy. That doesn't mean anything in fantasy, but it just goes to
motivation-wise, it helps.
Well, exactly, and it shows how much the team believes in him. I think he's going to be right up there contending for the Norris Trophy too, and mostly just based off points alone, mostly assists too. I think over the past 4 years, he leads defensemen in assists, and even in 5-on-5 points, I think he's like top 10 for all skaters. So
he's really high.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have Quinn in the same spot 5. I think it's the perfect spot for him. He really is it's not mid-tier, but he's the middle of the pack for this top 10.
Yeah.
He bridges that gap between scoring and, what these next handful kind of provide in a similar fashion, but just not up to the standard that he gives. Let's do number 6.
So I got Dougie Hamilton 6.
Okay.
We've already talked about how great New Jersey is right now. He is the guy on the back end. Will Luke Hughes come up and challenge that? Probably not this year, but maybe soon. But right now, everything's going to run through him on the back end. He's going to be on the first power play unit. He had a great season last year. He kind of started to fall off a little bit. Then last year, he just took that. He's like, hey, I'm back, everybody. So I think that he's here to stick for a few more seasons at least. And he's pretty young, too. He's not as old as some people think he is. So, yeah.
I love Hamilton. I have him in my one keeper league, and he's still one of my keepers. So I definitely have him high up on my value list. He is my number 10 for this, based off of one reason alone, and that's his injury history.
Yeah.
Because if he gets hurt, you just have a dead asset on what you would normally be getting just so much out of, because of what he can produce. So I only drop him lower down to my 10 spot for the sake of that injury history. Net number 6, people might think this is a little high, but I put Evan Bouchard. I think he's going to take that step as a top-end defenseman in Edmonton. And with how offensively charged they are, I think his power play points are going to go up. I think his overall points are going to go up. And I think his defensive metrics are still going to look really good. And I really, really would justify picking him up based off of his age as well. Being a young defenseman and developing somebody like that and molding it, I think is just such a fantastic asset to have on your keeper in your dynasty leagues.
Yeah, I have him at 8, and I even thought about putting him higher. I did have him at 7, then I kind of somebody else popped into mind. But yeah, for all the same reasons you said, like he's emerging as one of the best defensemen, one of the best young defensemen, and like you said, with all the offense in Edmonton, it's hard to go wrong picking the guy that's probably going to be running the first power play unit from the back.
All right, let's do 7. I had Heiskanen at 7, but we already talked about him. What do you got?
So I've got Erik Karlsson. I think that he's gonna right around the point of game mark, about 80 points. Obviously, there's so much offense in Pittsburgh this year, and he's coming off of a 100-point season. I even felt bad having him this low. But it's going to be tough with Letang. We saw what happened when he went to San Jose with Burns. And is that going to replicate itself in Pittsburgh? I sure hope not. I'm a huge fan of Karlsson. But yeah, I do think that he still has that offense in him. There's so much offense at the top end of that Pittsburgh forward group. It's just going to be a great fit, I hope.
Yeah, you touched on why the reason why I'm hesitant with Karlsson, because I love him as a player and I used to absolutely adore him as a fantasy asset, but he's just been so tumultuous between years, and it's just so difficult to pick up and be like, oh, he's confidently going to be this type of guy this year. You just don't really know. I don't have Karlsson in my top 10 because I have that fear that the competition between him and Letang basically fighting for the ice time and who's going to be producing, similar to what he dealt with Burns. I think it's just going to be detrimental to him, and I think it'll be a blow to his confidence. I think it'll affect his point scoring, and I'm not sure if he hits that, point per game. If he is, then awesome. But I think he might drop back down to that, 70 to 60 point type thing, which, isn't bad. Not at all. It's still a great fantasy asset, but comparatively, I wouldn't be confident taking as one of my top 10 defensemen.
Okay, fair enough.
You mentioned you had somebody at number 8. Who was your 8?
Evan Bouchard. So
you had Bouchard at 8. So yeah. I'll throw in Brandon Montour for my 8th spot. Florida is still recovering from that Stanley Cup final, and Montour is going to continue to be a top defensive and offensive asset for them. Can he replicate the 70-plus points? Maybe, but I doubt it. But I still think he has a good enough overall game that he's worth picking up over maybe Ekblad or some of these other, normally considered top defensemen in that grouping.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'm a huge fan of Montour as well. I don't know. He's going to miss the first little chunk of the season. I don't know if it's going to be 2 weeks or a month. Not really clear on that yet. But yeah, I can't argue with anything that you said. There's just a couple of guys that I prefer to take ahead of him.
Not a problem there. Who do you have for 9?
So 9, I have Roman Josi that we talked about.
Okay, so 9 was Josi. I have Charlie McAvoy at 9. Boston to me is tough because I'm still not really sure where they fit in that whole scheme. Losing Bergeron is a big deal. As much as people might want to downplay it, it is a big deal. Will they still be good? Yeah, but they're not going to be as good as last year. McAvoy is just a good all-around two-way D, and he still provides plenty of fantasy value being their best defenseman. And it's really as simple as that to me.
Yeah, that's fair. And with my number 10, I thought about putting McAvoy in there too. But I have Josh Morrissey for my last pick here. He just had a great year in Winnipeg. I know I talked about how Winnipeg is going to be that more defensive group, just with the system changing and everything. But Morrissey had a career year last year, and I think he's going to build on that. And maybe not build on it, but stay right around the same area, score 65 points maybe. So, and he's great defensively. He's going to get the hits and blocks and whatnot. He's just really well-rounded.
Yeah, I think that he might end up being a little underrated in fantasy this year because of that, presumption of what Winnipeg might be. But I don't think that should make anybody not pick him up as a top-end option. I wouldn't have him in my top 10, as I don't, but I'm not saying that it makes him bad.
Yep.
Let's shift to the goaltending. One of
Did
people's
you say
favorite
you're number 10?
categories to talk about. My 10 was Hamilton, because we
Oh,
talked
okay.
about him a lot earlier.
Yeah.
So let's jump to goaltenders. Number 1.
Okay. So I've got Ilya Sorokin number 1.
Okay.
I don't know how many people will have him number 1, but I like the defensive system in New York with the Islanders, I guess. He's a fantastic goalie on his own. He's got a huge extension. Uh, I don't know about the wins. I think the wins might deter some people from taking him first, but if the Islanders can get their stuff together, really put together a good season, because they have all the assets they need. They just need to put it all together. He might actually come out pretty high on the wins.
Yeah, that really is the only reason I have him drop lower. I don't have him at 1. I have Sorokin at 3 because he is still arguably one of the best goaltenders in the NHL just by skill. So he's going to get a lot of saves. He's going to have a high save percentage, and he's going to have a good goals against, even if his team isn't putting up wins. So that's the only reason I have him lower, is because of the possible, not guaranteed, possible lack of wins. The Islanders are still a good enough team that they can pull out a good enough amount of wins, especially off of Sorokin's back alone sometimes. So I don't disagree with the assessment on what he is. I just think he would be valued a little bit lower. I have him at my 4 spot, actually, not my 3. I read that wrong.
Okay, so who do you have first?
Yeah, for number 1 is Shesterkin, Igor Shesterkin. I have a lot of faith in what the Rangers are going to accomplish this year. I think they're going to be a high win team. Shesterkin has, shown that he can maintain a high save percentage along with a very, very fair goals against, including his Vezina winning season where he had a ridiculous goals against and save percentage. So is he going to be, running Vezina numbers all year? No, probably not, but there's always the chance that he could. And I think he provides the most value between his skill and what his team provides as a support for him.
Yeah, that's fair. And I have him down on my 3. I think there's quite a few interchangeable goalies this high.
Yeah.
It's more of a prediction at this point, just kind of guessing who you think is going to do better this year.
Yeah, goaltending is a little bit about the individual skill. And in my opinion, it rides a lot more on what do you think their team will do? Because wins at the end of the day are what you're going to get most out of with your goaltending.
Yeah.
On that topic, let's talk about number 2.
Yeah, so I've got Andrei Vasilevsky. I think that he's such a great goalie. In the regular season, he's not even close to playoff Vasilevsky, but he's still fantastic. He's puts up a great save percentage, great goals against. Obviously, he's gotten a ton of wins over the past few years. I think this year Tampa might take a little bit of a step back. We talked about that before we started recording too, but they're still a great team. They're still making the playoffs. If he can land around 46 wins, that'd be kind of where I expect him to land, which is really good.
Yeah, Vasilevsky you can count on for about, that high 30s to 40-something wins.
Yeah.
And that's just what you want out of a premier top 10 pick goaltender type thing. Yeah. So I have Vasilevsky at 2. It's Tampa Bay. They're going to get a lot of wins, and he's going to be another big reason behind it. So it helps when you have a good team and a really good goaltender. Yeah. Let's do number 3.
So yeah, that's where I have Shesterkin. He should have won the Hart over Auston Matthews, I think. He's just he has that in him that he can just take over any game whenever he wants. Now, last year he was a little bit more inconsistent. He wasn't as good, but I do think that he's going to land somewhere right in the middle and have like a 919, 920 save percentage. And just like you said, he's going to get a lot of wins in New York as well.
Yeah, even 919 is still really high in a league where scoring is up. So that's really good. I have Ottinger at number 3. He's a big part of the reason that Dallas is such a good team. So if you take Ottinger out of the equation, I think Dallas is probably about a third as good as what they would be having him in their lineup. So calculating the value between his save percentage numbers, his goals against numbers, and his wins, I think he would be my number 3.
Yeah, I have him number 4. So for all the same reasons, and again, we talked about how great Dallas is, and even without him, like you said, they're not going to be as good. They're still a decent team.
Yeah.
But when you put that franchise level goaltender in behind them, who's going to do fantastic on his own, it's just a perfect match for them.
When a goalie can carry you to a win, that's kind of the distinction with this kind of, top four grouping, because we just kind of interchange most of them, but we basically have the same names.
Yep.
Because I had Sorokin at 4, and you're saying you had Ottinger at 4. So let's dip down to number 5 then.
So I've got Connor Hellebuck. I know that we've talked about Winnipeg quite a bit already, but I do think that they're going to have a better year than a lot of people think. Again, because of that defensive system, that's going to help Hellebuck a little bit. He's got Laurent Brossoit behind him now, so he has a little bit more confidence in the net. I don't think last year he was really feeling it with Dave Riddick, so I don't know if that's going to have much of an impact. But I do think that he can get up to that Vezina caliber season again.
See, this is my hot take. I don't have Hellebuck in this top 10 at all.
Oof.
I know, and my reasoning is still consistent across the board in what I look for in my goaltending, which is wins first. Because even if they have that, good save percentage, good goals against, those individual stats are fantastic. But at the end of the day, I want wins. Those are what are going to win my category leagues and my points leagues every single time. And I'm not confident enough in Winnipeg as a team to get as many wins as the goaltenders for these other teams. And that's why I don't have him in my top 10. Instead, at number 5, I have Georgiev. I have confidence that he is still a very good goaltender and a very reliable starting goaltender. And the Avalanche are going to win a bunch of games. So combining the two values, I'd have Georgiev at 5.
Yeah, so I have him down at 8. And honestly, completely justifiable to bump him up a few. He's part of the only him and Rantanen are the only reason that the Avalanche made the playoffs last year. So can't discredit anything that he's done, and I'm right there with you.
All right, let's do number 6 then.
So I've got UC Saros here. Like I said, with the Nashville defensive group, there's so much stability there, and he's already a fantastic goaltender. I would say he's a top 4 goalie. I would have him, like if I was doing a fantasy draft, I'd probably take him above Ottinger right now. Obviously the age might change that a little bit. But I just think that despite Nashville not being able to outscore any problems, I don't think they're going to have to outscore it by much.
I really like Saros. He's another person I don't have in his top 10, but he was my number 11. And my only, again, it comes down to I don't think Nashville's going to be winning enough games to justify it yet. I think by next year or even the year after that, you're really going to be seeing a soaring high value in somebody like Saros. Yeah. So don't stray away from him just because I don't have him in a top 10 or any way, shape, or form, because he's 100% worth taking in a high-end spot. So don't listen to me in that regard of me not putting him in a higher ranking, because he 100% deserves to be in a higher ranking. He's one of the best goalies in the league right now.
I think you having him outside the top 10 is worse than me having Yossi at 9.
Well, we can all have different things for people to yell at us about online. So let's keep it going. My number 6, I have Freddie Anderson. I have faith in Carolina. If Anderson's healthy and he doesn't have glass bones, he's criminally underrated, and people tend to stray away from him for some reason that I don't get. You can always interchange goaltenders, and you can keep one on IR, and Anderson is always going to produce wins, saves, and just everything else you want for goaltending. And I value him probably much higher than some other people would.
Yeah, so I don't have him in my top 10. I do think I completely agree. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Carolina right now. They're a wagon. But they have 3 goalies that are very capable of taking over the starting role. Obviously, they want to keep Freddie Anderson as the starter as long as they can. But Antti Ranta had a ridiculous record last year and had a fantastic season. And Pyotr Kochetkov is coming up. He's in the AHL. He does not need waivers this year, so he will start in the AHL. But he might challenge for that spot. There might be an injury, which Would not be surprising with that tandem in Carolina. And if he takes over, then that's his net. They're going to go with the best goalie. They're going to go with the hot hand. I think anybody can be the hot hand. So I like to stay away from Carolina goaltending just because you never know who's going to be the starter.
Fair enough. That's definitely another concern. My only general concern with Anderson was the injury history, but that's a great point. Who do you have for 7?
So number 7, I have Linus Ullmark. Again, I think Boston's taking a step back this year, but I don't think Ullmark will. He won the Vezina. I don't think he's doing that again. He's obviously not going to have nearly as many wins, but he is still going to be up there in the wins. He's probably going to be splitting it with Jeremy Swayman, but he's going to have probably around 30 wins, which is still pretty solid, and then great individual stats as well.
Yeah, I have Ullmark. I interchange Ullmark and Swayman I have for a while because they really are a tandem. It's not really a starter backup position between the two of them. It's who's playing better right now, put them in. And that really is what it's going to ride on. So I think they're interchangeable. I have them at my 8th spot, just below this.
Okay.
And you're right with everything you said. I don't have the confidence he's going to have as high of a win total or that he's going to have as obscene numbers that he did this year.
Yeah.
But he'll still have really good numbers, and so will Swayman. And they're both going to be very close between their wins, goals against, save percentage, because Boston's still a good team. My number 7, speaking of teams that win a lot of games and are expected to, I have Ilya Samsonov for Toronto. I think he's going to have that starting spot. I think what he was doing towards the end of last year and how well he played is really going to carry his momentum into this year, because I've always liked him as goaltender, even when he was playing in Washington. I think he was just misused and he was undervalued, and I still think he has all the capabilities in the world to just be a top tier starter, maybe not an elite goaltender, but a top tier starter. And that's really worth a lot in fantasy.
Yeah, Toronto is pretty much a lock to win the Atlantic this year. I don't think that's a hot take at all.
Not really.
And he's going to be the starter. He's got Joseph Woll behind him, who's pretty solid, but he's a backup goalie. He's probably going to play about 60 games, maybe 55, as long as he can stay healthy, of course. And yeah, probably lead the way. They don't even need to rely on him to be great in net. They can outscore a lot of problems. I think that they got a little bit worse this offseason. I know some people look at it as if the team got better. Some look at it got worse. You just have to kind of figure out what you value on a roster. I think they got better for the playoffs, but a little bit of a step back in the regular season.
I'm personally fine if Toronto doesn't win the games this year, but that's just speaking as a Sabres fan.
Yeah. No,
but in general, they will. That's just the type of team they are. They're going to win a lot of games, and Samsonov is going to be a backstop to a lot of that. I had Ullmark Swayman at 8. Who's your 8?
Alexander Georgiev, who we already talked about. So my number
9.
Yeah, my number 9 is Philip Gustafsson. I know that he had unrealistically good year last year. I think he had finished with like a 932 save percentage. He's not going to duplicate that this year, but he's going to get a lot of wins on Minnesota. It's a pretty weak Western Conference right now. He's going to put up solid numbers too. Again, nowhere close to the 932, but if he can get like 916, 917 save percentage, and like a 2.3, 2.4 goals against, that would be fantastic. And there's nothing really wrong with his game other than he needs to do it one more year, and then I'll put him up a little bit higher.
Yeah, that's kind of the only reason I didn't have him in the top 10. He was my number 11 kind of for that. Can I justify taking him in these other spots? He hasn't really proven, even though he has, shown a lot of promise as a really good young goaltender. And ultimately, he's going to be fighting for a spot with Wallstedt in the fairly near future as well. So I don't want to say don't grab him because he's still very good. But he's not a top 10 for me for what the future may hold in Minnesota for their goaltending.
Yeah, that's fair.
My number 9 might be a slight hot take, is Vitek Vanacek. I loved what he did in New Jersey. I think he can replicate it. I don't think he needs to be that, 2.2, 2.3 goals against type goaltender with a 920 save percentage. I think him just racking up wins with a, 2.5 something goals against and a 908 to a 910
Yeah.
is more than enough to justify him as a top end goalie just based off of what New Jersey's expected to do for wins this year.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Vanacek, and taking any goaltender that's playing behind that Dallas group, the Devils group. But my only concern is, like you said with Wallstead, is Akira Schmid going to take over that starting job? He looked really, really good at times last year. So I would just be a little bit worried about, is the starter job his for sure? So
at that point, I would consider them more of an Allmark Swayman type thing as a tandem, because the league is really favoring tandems this year, and going into the future. And for fantasy, that is a little bit hurtful towards goaltenders, unless you really have both of them. But time will tell more than anything else.
Yep, no, I agree. So my number 10 is Thatcher Demko.
Okay.
I think that Vancouver's going to be hovering right around the wild card spot. They have a lot of great pieces, kind of like I said with I don't know who I said it about, but they have to put their team, the Islanders. They can just put all those pieces together, that they're easily making the playoffs. They have the talent to do it. They have all the roster pieces that they need to do it. It's just a matter of, can they do it? They're going to be coming in under Rick Tocchet. They played a lot better under him last year. If Thatcher Demko can stay healthy and the Canucks can push for a playoff spot, I think that it's going to be a great situation.
Yeah, I don't have any issues with that type of deal. I don't have enough confidence in Vancouver to get that amount of wins. I love Demko as a player. I think he deserves better recognition for what he is as a goaltender in Vancouver. So no issues. And him still being fairly young, you're going to get a lot of value out of him in a long-term league as Vancouver gets better throughout the years. So I would probably have him as like my 12 or 13. For my 10, just because of how amazing I feel Edmonton is and the amount of wins they're going to get, I'm going to put Stuart Skinner at my 10 spot. I don't have the confidence that him as a goaltender yet is going to be putting up ridiculous numbers. I don't have confidence yet in the Edmonton defense to fully support him and getting super low numbers, but I still think he can get by with like a 2.6 something goals against and maybe, that 908 to 912 save percentage, depending on how many shots they really let through. But it's the wins. It's purely the wins with Stuart Skinner for me.
Yeah, you know what? That's fair. I think you might have just sold me on him a little bit more than I was. I don't have him pushing my top 10 right now, but he's definitely closer than he was before your little explanation. I do have
winning that Calder helps.
Well, yeah. How close was Devin Levi for you?
I'll be honest, I just didn't want to go on a 45-minute rant about Devin Levi so we can just save the amount of time. But he's in my top probably 15. As a Buffalo fan, I'd probably put him at like 5 just because I'm on the hype train more than just about anybody else. Yeah. But as a realistic fantasy owner and what I want out of my goaltenders, he wouldn't be my starting option. He would be my second goaltender option because he hasn't fully proven he can take on the workload on an extended period of time yet. So until I see that, I wouldn't be grabbing Devin Levi as my pure starter. As a Sabres fan, I will just make the most young, ridiculous Sabres lineup known to man.
I think I would be comfortable reaching on him a little bit if he's not my first goaltender. Kind of like you said. So I would take him, probably around the 13, 14, 15 goaltenders.
If you grab somebody kind of in my mid-tier, that the Vanacek, the Swayman, the Skinner, you can take that little bit of an extra reach on somebody like Levi, or even Wolf out in Calgary, if you believe that he can, really jump into that spot, because he's kind of on that same level as Levi as far as skill and prowess goes. So it's how much do you want to reach for a player like that? And sometimes you got to take out your homer aspect when it comes to your fantasy picks if you really are trying for longevity in your leagues.
Well, if we're talking about our homer picks, we might as well move on to our centers.
Yeah, let's do it because this is our last category, but this is the one that everybody likes to talk about. This first handful should go fairly quick. Let's start with the obvious.
First, I've got Connor McDavid. That's like enough said. He's going to score 140 points this year. Nobody's coming close to that.
Yeah, I'm going to say that you're wrong, and it's going to be no, it's McDavid. It's sad that we even have to have that discussion at this point. Number 2,
Leon Draisaitl. He gets to play with McDavid, and he's incredible on his own. 55 goals, 110 points. That's like his floor now. So,
yeah, if you want to hear the in-depth, like full-blown explanation on these, we just did our center episode last week, and we didn't talk much about McDavid because you don't have to, but we talked a decent amount about Draisaitl and some of these other guys. So I agree with Draisaitl at 2. Who do you got at 3?
I got Nathan McKinnon. I saw a post today. I don't know where it was. I'd like to credit them. But when they were talking about McDavid, it was something about fantasy, or McKinnon, sorry, something about fantasy. They said he only plays 70 games, but produces as much as anybody else does at 82 games in a similar way that like Mario Lemieux does. Obviously, he's not getting those same point totals, but just because he misses 12 games a year or so, that doesn't take away any value. He's still putting up those numbers worthy of the third center pick.
Yeah, it's like I said in the previous episode. He's McDavid, but slower. That's it.
Yep.
It's the same exact idea. So I have McKinnon at 3 as well. Who's 4?
I've got Austin Matthews at 4. He's pretty close to McKinnon. I could understand you wanting to interchange those. Matthews will score more goals probably. He's got a healthy wrist headed into this year. But yeah, pretty easy stuff about Matthews.
Yeah, Matthews, you're getting minimum of 40, average of about 50, and praying for 60. That's just how Matthews functions. I have Matthews at 4 as well. Who do you have at 5?
I've got Jack Hughes at 5. I think he's going to take another step this year. He had 99 points last year. There's a good chance that he breaks 110 points, 40 goals. Like he leads that New Jersey Devils group that we've talked so much about already. So yeah.
Yeah, if you're one of those people that had the foresight to pick up Jack Hughes while he was still being, an okay player, hats off to you. You're smarter than the rest of everybody else. You're smarter than the rest of everybody else in your league.
Yeah.
And you get to reap those rewards. I also have Hughes at 5. He's going to break 100 points this year. I have no doubt in my mind. So let's go to 6.
This is a real controversial list so far.
Yeah, this is super hard.
Number 6,
just a different breed.
Number 6, I've got Elias Pettersson. And that goes along with my confidence in Vancouver. Again, I don't think they're winning the President's Trophy or anything, but I think they're going to have a better season than they have the last few years. He's going to score well over 100 points. He's got the face-offs. He's really good on the draw. And just, he does all the right things for fantasy. He's a really good player.
Yeah, I have Pettersson a little bit lower on my list, down at 8. So it's not, a super low drop-off, but it's fairly similar because this little grouping here, 6, 7, 8, is fairly interchangeable. Yeah. But no, Pettersson is all world when it comes to fantasy because he does just about everything that you want him to. Yeah. I have Tage Thompson for me at 6 because I think
the homer pick. There's the homer.
Yeah. You don't get a razz on me too much about it, but I genuinely believe he is going to add a little bit more to his game as far as his defense goes because he does get time not only on power play, but he does get PK time. So he's gonna, get a couple extra blocks. He might get a couple extra hits. And I think that, gives a little bit of extra fantasy value to him. I think he's going to be that 50 goal mark. I think he's going to push 100 points. So I put him slightly ahead of these other two. That's why I have him at 6.
Yeah. I got nothing to argue with you about Thompson. Moving on to number 7, I have Braden Point. That first line in Tampa is dangerous, as we mentioned. He's got Steven Stamkos and Nikita Kucherov playing on his wings. You can't get any better than that unless you got McDavid and Draisaitl on your wings. He scored 50 goals last year, like we mentioned with our center video. Quietest 50-goal season maybe ever. Like, nobody was talking about it. Does all the right things. Great pickup.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about 50 goals when you have multiple 60-goal scorers. It just completely overshadows it. So, yeah, I pointed 7 as well. He's a premier fantasy forward. He's a premier just top-line center all day, every day, and he's a huge part of that Tampa offense. So, 100% agree, pointed 7. Who do you have at 8? Because I had Pettersson.
Moving on to 8, I've got Tim Stützle. I think he's going to take another step offensively. He scored the 90 points in 78 games going into last season as a 20-year-old. Like, that was quite impressive. I think he can push 45 goals, 110 points this year. Just take another step. Ottawa's got some more offense into the lineup. They took out DeBrincat, but now they have Josh Norris, Vladimir Tarasenko, and Dominic Kubalik. So he's in a better spot all around. Now, Josh Norris might take some of the workload off of him, and he might kind of stay around the same level. But I do think that Stützle is going to take a big step this year.
So you mentioned the reason that I don't have Stützle in my top 10, but he was my number 11. And it was for that reason you mentioned right at the end there, is that Norris might take some of that, scoring away from him because of how he'll produce. So he might not jump up. He might just kind of not flatline, but he'll stay in that similar point mark and goal total that he did this year. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Right.
So I love Stützle as a player, especially as a young player. You should value him probably a little bit more than some of the other guys that I'll mention, just because of how really young he is. It's not like he's, just under 25. He's under 23, and that provides a lot more value in dynasty leagues.
Yeah. He doesn't turn 22 until January.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Who do you have for 9?
Well, you talked about how the 6, 7, and 8 is like they're so close, and then there's a huge drop off after that going to 9. So that's where I have Tage Thompson.
Okay.
No, he's right there with the rest of them, and all the same reasons. Honestly, I might take him over Tim Stützle, but just because you're Buffalo, I'm Ottawa, I had to put Stützle first. But just because of the physicality, I might have to put Tage Thompson above Tim Stützle, but for all the same reasons. Like, they're both on the younger side. They're both going to push 45, 50 goals, maybe if not this year, over the next half decade. And they're both so fantastic.
Yeah, it's close. That's the problem, is it's so close. It's what do you think as a fantasy owner that your player is going to pick? And people are going to gravitate towards more their home team because they're like, my team's better than their team. And that's completely okay. There's nothing with having a little bit of homerness to your fantasy team. My one buddy in my keeper league, he does that with a bunch of his players. Most of his roster is just players he really likes. And there's a bunch of Buffalo players on it. And he placed second in the league last year. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, as long as you're drafting them.
There's always a way to do it.
Area.
Yep. It's just making the right picks at the right time based off your timing. My number 9, I have Roope Hintz. Top line center all throughout. Defensive plays left and right. He's an all-around center, great playmaker. If you're in one of those deeper leagues where, you have like 15, 20 guys, and you might not be able to get some of these, ridiculous high-end guys with your top picks, and you're kind of towards the bottom of that, sneak in Roope Hintz with one of those picks, and you're not going to be disappointed. That's kind of why I have him in my top 10, because some people might not pay attention to him comparable to the others.
Right. I have him in my 10 for all the same reasons.
I jumped to 10 with Zibanejad. I have him in just about every league. I talked about this before. I love his consistency. I love his point scoring. I love everything he does for me in fantasy, and his value across the board is worth more than some of the streakier players, or worth more than some of these, older centers like Crosby, Malkin, who are still also great fantasy assets if you're picking up either of those. But I think Zibanejad's age gives him that little bit of an extra boost between those other ones.
Perfect. And he's definitely there to help you out off the ice too with his DJ Z-Bad services.
What is that?
He's a DJ off the ice.
I had no idea.
Really?
I need to find that
Yeah,
somewhere.
he's a professional DJ. It's quite funny.
That's fantastic. He better be running all the music in the locker room then. That would be awesome. Well, actually, there might be too much pressure for him. Who knows? All right. Well, that, as far as I'm concerned, we got through all the top 10 lists. Any side comments you want to throw in before we wrap up?
No, not really. Obviously, we could go on and on about all the guys that just missed our list. The only one I want to give kind of an honorable mention to is in my centers is Alexander Barkov. He's right there for me. Just fantastic.
Barkov has 100-point potential, and he's
Yeah.
still underrated in fantasy for some reason.
Yeah.
Don't sleep on Barkov either. He's in that same category as Hens, if you ask me. All right. Well, thank you everybody again for tuning into this week's episode of Fantasy Forecheck. Next show, we're going to be doing mock drafts for some upcoming, fantasy drafts as the season gets closer and closer. So we'll have some ideas for you on where some of these players might end up going. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your preferred listening channel and to the Hockey Writers podcast and YouTube pages, where you can find anything and everything else hockey related. You can also follow me on Twitter at Strozyk7.
And I'm there at Jacob Billington.
And feel free to drop us a like, and we will keep you up to date on anything and everything else fantasy throughout the year. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. We will see you next time.